go out and sell my trade. So I wound up working for, I believe it was Master Madison. I was the only black one on there, at that site. And can you imagine, with all the white men that was there, I was their gopher. Frederick, 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 Negro, get over here. Frederick, get over here now. I ain't gonna tell you to get over here no more. Frederick, get over here. And it got so frustrating that one of them put their hands on me, and I had already sworn that after the fight with Master Corvée that I would not allow anyone else to touch me. Well, what could I do when I had 5 of them to jump on me and beat me so drastically? Matter of fact, one almost knocked my eye out. And I had a fight with one of them, and it broke my wrist. And I wound up living the rest of my life with a broke wrist. And I went back and I told Master Hugh Arden what happened. And would you believe? Master stood up for me. He went to the job site and he told that boss, he said, why you let your men jump on my Frederick? Why? And he even went to the sheriff's department. And the sheriff said, well, did anybody see it? And he said, yeah, there were some other blacks there. They don't count. So they wind up getting away with beating my Frederick. That's what he said. Well, that was all fine and dandy because I had a plan. And I didn't tell you this, though, that when he sent me out and allowed me to go to work, I was making money. I made $6 a week. But I had to bring that $6 and give it to the master. Master paid me too. Yes, he did. He gave me, how much he gave me? Anybody want to take a guess? How much he gave me out of that? How much? How much he gave me? Smiling like me. I don't know who that little pretty girl is. But anyway, Master gave me, out of the $6 I took to him, he gave me 6 cents. And he only gave me the 6 cents because he felt guilty. He felt like he was robbed. He knew he was robbing me. Well, after so long, I wound up getting another job. Shh, don't tell anybody. If this gets outside this room, I know who said it. My next job, I was making $10 a week. Shh. But here's the plan. When I went to give my money to Massa, I gave Massa $6. And I kept the $4. That's right. And guess what? Massa had the audacity to give me a pay raise. He took me from $6, 6 cents, to how much? Anybody want to take a guess? How much he raised me up to?
10 cents.
10 cents. No.
Wrong.
Go ahead.
Oh my God.
Wow, she almost had it too. All right? He took me up to 25 cents. 25 cents. That means that I was the highest paid slave at that time. Well, he didn't know about those $4 that I was saving up. Those $4 I was saving up was saving it for September the 3rd, 1838. That's what I was saving it for when I would turn 20 years old. But before that time would come, I would wind up meeting a free slave by the name of Anna Mary. Anna Mary would wind up selling some of her merchandise. And not only that, she came up with a sailor suit. The shirt was red, the pants was white. And she came up with a fake ID. And she said, Frederick, don't worry, it's your time. Well, September the 20th, that's what I did. All those $4 that I saved up, they came in handy. And I made my way to the train station. And when I got to that train station, I got on that train, I managed to sit down. Now, keep in mind, while I'm sitting here by the window, behind me, maybe 3 or 4 seats behind me on the left side, there are some black slaves that's on the other side. They're running away, all right? But the train conductor does not know this. But he's coming through. Tickets, tickets, get your tickets. And all of a sudden, when he got to them, he was talking to them in an aggressive manner, such as, you got your ticket, you Negroes got your ticket, you better not be escaping. Are you escaping? No, master, we're not escaping. And I was just sitting there getting, the more I heard this, the more I was starting to shake and get scared. But it's funny though, because when he came over to me, he was like, young man, do you have a ticket? Or better yet, do you have a pass? And I responded to him, I said, sir, no, I do not have a pass. Why you don't have a pass? I said, sir, because I'm on my way back to the fort. I'm on my way back to the fort. I never carried my ID. I just carried his pass. This ticket here. He said, oh, is that your ticket? I said, yes, sir. Now notice, I didn't hold it right here. I held it right here. And he looked at it. The only thing that was on that ticket was an eagle. And that's all he saw. And he said, And he paused, and my heart is going like 1,000,000 miles an hour because he took so long to answer. And then he said, okay, when you sit here and you be quiet, don't say nothing. Let me let you know, as you sit there, you can see that I'm perspiring. Well, at that point, I could have filled up a whole pool. That's how much I was sweating. And when he left, all I was doing was wiping the sweat from my brow. And next thing I know, 24 hours later, we had landed in the big city of New York. And when I got off that train, I got my little baggage, and I got off, and quite naturally, I'm still scared because I don't know, that there might be some slave catchers out here. So as I'm walking around, I see signs, poles, that's all around. Warning, runaway slave, $50. Warning, runaway slaves, $100. All the way up to about $1,000 catching runaway slaves. Well, I was also amazed because when I got off the train and I saw black men with nice suits on and the tall hats on, and when women would walk by, they would just bow to the woman, such as, and the women with these long dresses on that come out to here and their little pouches of pocketbooks and what have you, and just strolling along. I was so amazed because I'd never seen clean black people before. And all of a sudden I was approached by a man. Come to find out, Mr. Rucker, he was a lawyer, but I couldn't trust him. And he said, come go with me. And I was like, who are you? And when he told me who he was, I took a chance and I went with him anyway. So I went to his home, and he allowed me to stay there for 3 days. Now keep in mind, I did say Anna Mary. I stayed there for 3 days. And on that third day, when I came downstairs, there was somebody sitting there. Anybody want to take a guess who was sitting there? Anna Mary. That's right. Anna Mary was sitting there. And not only was she sitting there, well, Mr. Rucker, he called in a preacher. And we got married. And then on top of that, we changed my name. I didn't even tell you my name. That's the good part because here it is. I was born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey. And by the time I left from here with my wife, it had changed from all that to Frederick Johnson. And I said, I'm not too keen with that name Johnson because there's a lot of people named Johnson. So the man, Mr. Rucker said, just keep the name for the time being. So Anna and I, we got on the next train going north to New Bedford. When we got to New Bedford, after 3 months of working, I wound up going to an anti-slavery meeting. And not only did I go to an anti-slavery meeting, we got to the point where we started working on my last name. Well, it was all because of a play, Lady on the Lake. Inside that play, there was a person in the play with Douglas as a name. But his name was Douglas with a 1S. I took that name and I put that double S on it, Douglas. Well, I went to an anti-slavery meeting. While sitting there, listening, a gentleman approached me. And he said, are you Frederick? And I was bewildered because of the fact that I know there were people out looking for slaves. And he said, I heard all about you. He said, I want you to meet somebody. And I was like, okay. And then all of a sudden he pulled out a newspaper. It was a Liberator. And he showed me an article. Well, guess who the article was about? It was about me. And I was like, wow. So I got up and I followed him. And he took me and he introduced me to a white guy. The white guy's name was William Lloyd Garrison. And Mr. Garrison approached me, he shook my hand, and he said, Mr. Douglas, I would love for you to stand up and speak. At this time, I was probably about 23 years old. And he said, I would love for you to speak and tell the audience about life as a slave. I responded by saying, Mr. Garrison, I don't have any formal education. I can't speak. He said, Mr. Douglas, we heard all about you. Well, next thing you know, I got behind the podium and I spoke. And I spoke for about an hour about my miseries as a slave. And all the audience contained nobody but white people. When it was all said and done, they all stood up and they gave me a standing ovation. And it was just like, marvelous, Mr. Douglas, marvelous. Well, from there, Mr. Garrison, he hired me. I'll say it again. He hired me to be one of his speakers on the anti-slavery tour. And that officially marked me as an abolitionist. I spoke for 6 months, and in 1845, I wrote my first book, The Narrative and Life of Frederick Douglass. Anyone ever heard of that book? I wrote that book, and would you believe, after I wrote that book, many people didn't believe that I wrote it. They started saying that it was a white person who wrote that book and just put my face on the cover. Well, not only did I write that book, but that book was written in 5 different languages. Not only did I write that book, but that book sold 5,000 copies around the world. I think that was pretty good for my first outing as an author. Well, Mr. Garrison came to me at the house one Saturday morning. Anna was sitting down holding little Annie, and he burst in and he said, Frederick, you gotta leave, you gotta leave. I said, what, I gotta leave? I got a speech to make this afternoon. Forget the speech, you gotta leave. Because in your book, you named all your slave owners, and they're going to come after you. You got to go. Well, upon listening to that, and my wife Annie saying, go, Frederick. It's going to be okay. I'd rather have you alive than dead, Frederick. So I left. And I took my first trip to Ireland. And when I got to Ireland, I stayed over there for exactly 2 years, 1847. And one reason I came back was because my baby girl Annie had died. She was only 10 years old. The second reason I came back, because I had met some very influential people in England. One comes to mind, Miss Richardson. We were at a gathering. And she comes up to me. Frederick. Yes? Frederick, we got good news. Oh, what's the good news? We sent $750 to your slave owner, Hugh Howard, in America. We paid for your freedom. My freedom? I'm free? Yes, Frederick. And furthermore, Frederick, you don't have to go back. We'll send for your family to come over. And you can live the rest of your life here, a free man. I thought about it. It definitely sounded good, too. But then reality hit. And I said to her, Miss Richardson, thank you very much for purchasing my freedom. However, I must go back to America. And the reason I must go back to America is because there's more of my people that are under bondage, that are still in slavery. And I must go back to help them. Okay, Frederick. Okay, no problem. Well, after my last sip and maybe another couple of days, I got on the ship. And I made my way back to America. Not only did I make my way back to America, but I had to sneak my way back into America, even though I was a free man. The reason I had to sneak back in because I had no official papers stating that I was a free man. That was yet to come from Master Hugh Howard. But anyway, when I get back, and my family's in Rochester, New York, I started my newspapers, the Frederick Douglass Weekly, the North Star, and various other papers. William Lord Garrison and I, we began to riff. And the reason we began to riff and separate is because of the fact that Mr. Garrison, who I love to this day, regardless, but he thought the Constitution, his fight was the Constitution that was written. He believed that that Constitution was the enemy to slavery, and he didn't want to be bothered with it. Well, myself, I knew that that Constitution was an enemy to slavery. However, my quest was to use that Constitution to get the freedom for slaves. And I did that, regardless. And believe it or not, Mr. Garrison even got to the point where he would start writing scandalous things about me in his newspaper. And my wife, Anna, in his newspaper. That's how much of a riff we had gotten. But it didn't matter because I believed in and I fought for what I believed in. And that was the freedom of blacks in this country. Well, not so long after that, the KKK. Anybody ever heard of the KKK? What is the KKK? Anybody? Ku Klux Klan. All right? They bombed my house, and I want to thank my son, Lewis. As a matter of fact, I had me and Anna, we had 5 children. Lewis, Frederick, Charles, Rosetta, and our baby girl, Anna, who I told died at the age of 10. Rosetta became my sidekick, if you will, because during the time of the newspaper, she worked hard with me. And Charles did as well. Well, after 40 years, can you imagine? 40 years of married to my beautiful wife, Anna, she died. And it took a lot out of me because she was really my backbone. And I truly, honestly loved my Anna. Well, I want to give a thank you to the likes of Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman, because with those two coming to the house and helping me and speaking to me, because I was at my wit's end when I lost my Anna. I was about just to call it a day. But because of the likes of Miss Tubman and Miss Ida B. Wells coming to my side, I got myself spunked up again. And next thing you know, we moved to Washington, D.C., Cedar Hill, Anacostia. And if you ever get a chance to, please visit my home. Upon moving to Washington, D.C., I was called to the White House again. This time I was called to the White House by President Abraham Lincoln. And about this time, it was maybe about 1864. About this time, President Lincoln had just been re-elected. About this time, he saw something that nobody else saw. And even at the second inauguration, while he was standing up there speaking, and I'm sitting in the audience looking at him, believe it or not, I could see death. I could see death all over him. I don't know what it was. But to any avail, after he started speaking, and he sat down next to the vice president, and he looked up and he looked out in the audience. And he saw me sitting out there. And the vice president, Andrew Johnson, was sitting right here, and they were laughing and giggling. And then all of a sudden he said, Andrew, there's my good friend Frederick right there. Frederick, Frederick! And when I did that, I noticed the vice president, his facial expression went from, and I knew right then that he was no friend of the black people. I mentioned when President Lincoln was speaking, I saw death all over him. Well, it was April the 15th or April the 14th, 1864 or 1865. President Abraham Lincoln and his beautiful bride, Mary Lincoln, were at the Lincoln Theater enjoying the play. And out of nowhere, from behind, John Wilkes Booth walked in and shot Mr. Lincoln in the head, right here. And in case you didn't know that John Wilkes Booth, instead of being up here killing the president, he was supposed to be down there as part of the play. Just that quick, April the 15th, they had Mr. Lincoln's funeral. Sometimes later, they would dedicate a memorial park to Mr. Lincoln, and it still stands to this day in Washington, D.C. I was part of the audience. They had a lawyer that was up speaking. They booed the lawyer. And they had me to come up and speak. And I told the audience, because I was a realist, I told them that President Abraham Lincoln was not a friend to the black man. Abraham Lincoln was a friend only to the white race. We as black people in this country, we were adopted. We were his adopted children. We were his stepchildren. But I must say in his favor that President Abraham Lincoln, he said what he was going to do in reference to freeing us here in this country. And as of January the 1st, 1863, he signed into law the Emancipation Proclamation freeing us black people. So Abraham Lincoln, I stand to this moment to say that yes, he is a friend of ours. Thank you. And immediately after I got finished and I went to take a step off the stage, his wife came, Mary Lincoln. She hugged me and she awarded me his cane, Abraham Lincoln's cane, which currently sits in my home in Cedar Hill. And from that point on, Miss Lincoln and I became good friends. Moving on, I began to start to get posts, meaning that certain jobs in the area of Washington, D.C. I became the first president of the Freedmen National Bank. I also became the first black marshal of Washington, D.C. I will also say that Miss Victoria Rudolph, she was running for president on the independent ticket. Well, unbeknownst to me, she had put me down as her vice president. And I got one vote, believe that, as vice president of the United States. At the 1888 Republican Convention, I got one vote as president of the United States. Moving on. I took a post in Haiti where I stayed and I worked in Haiti for 2 years, from 1889 to 1891. I quit that post because I was in disagreement with the president at that time. Also, let me ask this question. Anybody ever heard of President Grant? Ulysses S. Grant. Anyone ever heard? Show of hand. Anybody ever heard of him? Okay, I think he's on a dollar bill too. Isn't he on a dollar bill nowadays? Well, believe it or not, I went out and I campaigned vigorously for Mr. Grant to be president of the United States. I believed in Mr. Grant. And it was a good choice when Mr. Grant became president. Why was it a good choice? Well, I mentioned earlier about the KKK blowing up my home in Rochester, New York. Well, he signed an act, and it was called the Klan Act, meaning that he sent out marshals. He sent out the FBI to round up as many Klansmen as possible. And in that, 5,000 Klansmen were arrested and put out of commission, thanks to President Grant. And there was an article that was written by a well-respected black gentleman who stated that Grant was a dear friend of the black race because of the fact of what he's done. Now keep in mind, I was fortunate enough to see what was the beginning of what was called the Reconstruction era. That's when blacks began to gain office. Senators, mayors, lawyers. And I told a group of blacks who were moving from the South to move north, and they were moving to Kansas City. And I begged them not to leave. Please, whatever you do, don't leave. Let's stand and fight for our freedom. But they felt it was too heavy for them. So they migrated up to Kansas City. And they built homes, and they had a nice town and everything. But unfortunately, the KKK came and just blew up the whole town. You might have read about it. I felt bad, but then I told them not to leave. As time went on, and just for the sake of time, as I mentioned, I became Marshal of Washington, D.C. I became the creator of deeds. And 2 years after my wife died, I remarried. Gideon Pitts was a good friend of mine. He had a daughter. His daughter, Helen Pitts. was 20 years younger than I was. And at this time, I was 66, she was 46. She became my secretary. She was white. Her and I got married. My family, especially Rosetta. Rosetta had some foul words for Helen. Her family disowned her. However, we took trips around the world. And when I came back, as I began to close out, and I went on my last speaking engagement. With my cane, I was helped into the carriage. And I went to the Washington Convention Center. And I sat next to a very special person. Some of you all might have heard of her. Susan B. Anthony. Anybody ever heard of Susan B. Anthony? Anybody here have any Susan B. Anthony coins? I got about 5 of them. I already said that, let's see, how old? They're probably about 20 years old now. I said that when I'm gone, I'll pass them on to my son, and he'll probably pass them on to my granddaughter. I mean, that's what I'm saying. So anyway, as I got back, Susan B. Anthony, she helped me back to the carriage. I made it to the house. Helen was in the kitchen having tea with some girlfriends of hers. And she says to me, she says, "Frederick, are you hungry?" I said, "No, dear." I said, "I'm just going to go upstairs and rest for a while before my next engagement." She said, "Okay." So as I made it to the first step, I jerked. And she heard me, and she said, "Frederick, stop playing around." The next thing she heard was a thump. And that's where I died on the stairwell of a major heart attack. I lived a life from start to finish, being the best that I could be, knowing what my circumstances were and what I came out of. I lived a life in such a way that as many of my people that I could help to see, to know, to understand what it is to be free and why it's important to be free and to stay free. So I gave my life up into the last second to freedom. And before I end, I'd like to share a speech, if I can, that I gave. I gave this speech in 1865 in Boston, Massachusetts, at the annual meeting of the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society. It's called "What the Black Man Wants." Mr. President, I came here as I come always to the meetings in New England. I ask friends who are apologizing for not insisting upon this right, where can the black man look in this country for the insertion of his rights? If he may not look to the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society, where? Under the whole heavens can he look for sympathy in asserting this right? If he may not look at this platform, have you lifted us up to a certain height to see we as men, and then are any disposed to leave us there without seeing that we are put in possession of all our rights? We look naturally to this platform for the assertion of all of our rights, and for this one especially. I understand that the anti-slavery societies of this country to be based on 2 principles. First, the freedom of the blacks in this country, and second, the elevation of blacks in this country. Let me not be misunderstood here. sympathy at the hands of abolitionists. Sympathy at the hands of any. I think the American people are disposed often to be generous rather than just. I look over this country at the present time, and I see educational societies, sanitary commissions, freemen associations, and the likes. I must say, they're all very good. But in regards to the colored people, there is always more is benevolent. I perceive then jest manifested towards us. What I ask for the Negro is not benevolence, not pity, not sympathy, but simply justice. The American people have always been anxious to know what they shall do with us. General Banks was distressed with the solitude as to what he should do with the Negro. Everybody has asked the question, and they learned to ask it early of the abolitionists. What shall we do with the Negro? I have had but one answer from the beginning. Do nothing with us. If the apple will not remain on the tree of their strength, if they are worm-eaten to the core, if they are early ripe and disposed to fall, let them fall. I am not for tying or fastening them back on a tree in any way, except by nature's plan. And if they will not stay there, let them fall. And if the Negro cannot stand on his two legs, then let him fall also. All I ask, give him a chance to stand on his two legs. Let him alone. If you see him on his way to school, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going to the dinner table at a hotel, let him go. If you see him going to the ballot box, let him alone. Don't disturb him. If you see him going into a workshop, just leave him alone. Your interference is doing him a positive injury. General Banks' preparation is of a piece with his attempt to prop up the Negro. Let him fall if he can't stand alone. If the Negro cannot live by the line of internal justice, so beautifully pictured to you in the illustration used by Mr. Phillips, the fault is not yours, it will be his who made the Negro. And establish that line